Have you ever noticed what happens to a man when he's been alone for a long time? I don't mean a few months of solitude after a breakup or a period of self-imposed isolation to focus on work. I'm talking about years without a romantic relationship, without deep emotional intimacy, without someone there to hold up a mirror to his soul. What happens to a man when he is left entirely to his own devices, with no external force to shape him, challenge him, or keep him accountable? For some men, this solitude is a crucible. It refines them, sharpens them, turns them into something formidable. These are the men who embrace solitude as an opportunity to develop themselves, to master their craft, to build a disciplined and meaningful existence. They become stronger, mentally, physically, emotionally. They learn to depend on no one but themselves, forging an identity that isn't contingent on the validation of others. These are the men who take responsibility for their lives, who channel their solitude into growth, who rise above the need for fleeting companionship and instead cultivate a deep sense of purpose. But there's another side to this story, and it's far more common. The longer a man is without a relationship, the more he risks falling into stagnation. If he's not careful, isolation can breed complacency, bitterness, and even self-destruction. He may begin to retreat from the world, convincing himself that he prefers to be alone, when in reality, he's simply avoiding the discomfort of social interaction. He may start to resent the very idea of relationships, dismissing them as unnecessary or trivial, when in truth, he's simply afraid of vulnerability. Think about it. When a man has no external forces pushing against him, no partner challenging his assumptions, no emotional conflicts forcing him to grow, no intimate bond keeping him anchored to reality, what happens? He becomes locked inside his own mind. His thoughts begin to loop, unchallenged and unchecked. He constructs narratives that justify his solitude, convincing himself that relationships are a waste of time, that emotional connection is a weakness, that he is better off alone. But is he? Consider this: human beings are social creatures. We evolved in tribes, in families, in deeply interconnected social structures. For thousands of years, men were part of a framework that required them to engage, to contribute, to love and be loved. And yet today, an increasing number of men find themselves utterly alone, by choice or by circumstance, detached from meaningful relationships, drifting through life without a clear sense of purpose. Some fill the void with distractions, video games, pornography, mindless entertainment. Others turn to substances or destructive habits to numb the quiet ache of loneliness. And here's the real danger. The longer a man stays in this isolated state, the harder it becomes to break free from it. Social skills atrophy. Emotional walls grow higher. Fear of rejection solidifies. He becomes more comfortable in his solitude, but also more disconnected from the world. And the more disconnected he becomes, the more he convinces himself that he likes it this way. But does he, really? Or is it just easier to pretend that he does, rather than confront the fact that he's drifting further and further away from the very thing that makes life meaningful? Connection. This is what we need to talk about. Because a man who has been without a relationship for a long time is not necessarily a broken man. He is not necessarily lost. But he is standing at a crossroads. And the direction he chooses to go from here, towards strength, growth, and engagement with the world, or towards stagnation, bitterness, and withdrawal, will determine the course of his life. When a man finds himself alone for a prolonged period, something remarkable can happen, something rare in our hyper-connected, distraction-ridden world. He is faced with himself. No longer buffered by the demands and expectations of a romantic partner, he is left with nothing but his own thoughts, his own ambitions, and the stark reality of who he actually is. This is both a burden and an opportunity, and whether he flourishes or falters depends entirely on how he chooses to respond to that solitude. At first, solitude may feel like freedom, and in many ways it is. There's no one dictating how he spends his time, no compromises to be made, no emotional conflicts to navigate. The time that would have once gone into nurturing a relationship is now his alone, and if he's wise, he will use it to build something meaningful. Without external validation or the need to impress, he can begin to focus on personal mastery. He can set his own goals and pursue them with relentless discipline. A man alone has the chance to construct himself deliberately rather than be shaped passively by the influence of others. Many of the great thinkers, creators, and warriors throughout history spent significant periods in solitude. They withdrew from the noise of the world to hone their skills, refine their ideas, and strengthen their bodies and minds. A man who embraces solitude can cultivate habits that would have been difficult to develop in the constant presence of a partner. He can dedicate himself to learning, diving deeply into philosophy, psychology, history, or any discipline that sharpens his intellect. He can refine his craft, whether that's writing, business, art, or physical training. With no one else to rely on, he learns to master the art of self-discipline, developing the ability to set a course and stay on it without the need for external reinforcement. This is where solitude can be a forge, tempering a man into something formidable. And when no one else is there to encourage him, he must learn to encourage himself. When no one else holds him accountable, he must develop an iron will. The man who uses solitude wisely becomes a force to be reckoned with. He becomes dangerous, not in the sense of being harmful, but in the sense of being capable. He knows who he is, what he wants, and what he is willing to sacrifice to achieve it. He does not need a relationship to validate his worth because he has already proven it to himself. But there is another deeper transformation that can occur in prolonged solitude, one that goes beyond mere self-improvement. A man alone for a long time begins to see life differently. Without the emotional entanglements of a relationship, he gains clarity. He sees patterns that were once obscured by personal attachment. He understands people, not just as romantic partners, but as individuals with their own desires, fears, and insecurities. His emotional independence allows him to observe without bias, to engage without desperation, to value connection without being dependent on it. In this state, he develops a quiet confidence, a presence that does not seek approval because it is not lacking anything. He becomes comfortable in his own company, no longer feeling the need to fill every silence with conversation or every moment with distraction. He learns to be alone without being lonely, and this, paradoxically, makes him more attractive. The world is full of people who are desperate to be loved, who seek relationships not out of abundance but out of lack. But the man who has mastered solitude approaches relationships differently. He does not enter them from a place of need, but from a place of choice. He does not seek a partner to complete him, but to complement him. This makes him discerning. He is no longer willing to settle for mediocrity in his relationships because he knows what it is to be at peace alone. He does not cling to toxic dynamics out of fear of being single because he has learned that solitude, when used well, is not a curse but a gift. This is a man who walks through the world with a sense of purpose, who does not chase validation, who does not crumble under rejection. He has built himself in silence, away from the applause of the crowd, and now he stands unshaken. Yet, even as solitude sharpens a man, it also tests him. For all its benefits, it is not without its dangers, and whether it makes or breaks him depends entirely on his mindset. He must be vigilant against the creeping inertia that can come with prolonged isolation. He must be disciplined enough to maintain human connection, even when it is easier to retreat into his own world. He must remain engaged with life, not merely an observer of it, because while solitude can build a man, it can also consume him, and the line between strength and isolation is thinner than most realize. But solitude is a double-edged sword. And the longer a man remains without deep, meaningful relationships, the more he risks being consumed by the very isolation that once empowered him. What begins as a period of self-discovery and personal refinement can slowly turn into something far darker, a retreat from life itself. Human beings are not designed for prolonged isolation. We are social creatures, wired for connection, built to communicate, to love, to struggle with and against one another. And while a man may believe he is thriving in his solitude, he must be brutally honest with himself. Because the same solitude that sharpens can also erode. The mind is an echo chamber when left unchecked. A man who spends too much time alone begins to lose the refining force of external challenge. His ideas, once tested by the friction of conversation, may become rigid, unyielding, or even extreme. He convinces himself of his own correctness, his own superiority, because no one is there to challenge his assumptions, to provide an alternate perspective, to force him to justify his beliefs in the face of scrutiny, debate, discussion, even the occasional argument. These things sharpen the intellect, force a man to think critically, to reassess, to adapt. But in isolation, he grows too comfortable in his own head, and comfort breeds stagnation. The same applies to emotional intelligence. Relationships force a man to confront aspects of himself that solitude allows him to ignore. In a relationship, he must learn patience, compromise, empathy. He must navigate the complexity of another human being's emotions, learn to communicate effectively, understand the subtleties of nonverbal cues, recognize when he is in the wrong, and develop the humility to correct himself. But when he has been without this for too long, these skills begin to wither. His ability to connect diminishes, his capacity for understanding others weakens, and he finds himself more easily frustrated by social interactions. He becomes impatient with the nuances of human emotion, dismissing them as unnecessary or irrational, when in reality they are the very fabric of meaningful connection. This decline often happens so gradually that he doesn't even notice it. At first, he tells himself he simply prefers his own company. Then he convinces himself that relationships are a distraction, that emotional entanglements are a weakness, that most people are not worth the effort. Eventually, he stops seeking connection altogether, not because he no longer desires it, but because he has spent so much time avoiding it that he has forgotten how to pursue it. And the longer this continues, the more he withdraws, not just from relationships, but from life itself. This withdrawal is subtle at first. He stops reaching out to old friends, assuming they are too busy or uninterested. He turns down social invitations, telling himself he has more important things to focus on. He loses touch with the rhythm of human interaction, no longer accustomed to the natural give and take of conversation. Eventually, his world shrinks. The places he once frequented, the activities he once enjoyed, the relationships he once valued, all begin to fade into the background. His comfort zone tightens around him like a noose, and before he realizes it, he is no longer alone by choice. He is alone by default. And with that isolation comes another insidious danger: resentment. The man who has been without a relationship for too long may begin to view the world with bitterness. He sees couples in public and scoffs, telling himself that relationships are shallow, transactional, doomed to fail. He tells himself that he is better off alone, that he is above the need for companionship. But deep down there is a wound, an ache he refuses to acknowledge. He resents not just relationships, but the people in them, as though their happiness is an affront to his solitude. He dismisses love as foolish, affection as weakness, commitment as naive, all because he has distanced himself so much from these things that he can no longer understand them. Worst of all, he may begin to resent himself. The man who isolates for too long loses faith in his ability to connect. He wonders if he is even capable of love anymore, if he has spent so much time alone that he has forgotten how to be with someone. and this thought terrifies him. So instead of confronting it, he buries it beneath layers of cynicism and self-righteousness, telling himself that he has chosen this life, when in reality, he no longer knows how to choose anything else. This is the paradox of prolonged solitude. What begins as a source of strength can, if left unchecked, become a slow erosion of the very things that make life meaningful. A man who isolates for too long may find himself unbreakable, unshakable, impervious to the emotional chaos of relationships, but at what cost? What does it mean to be unbreakable if no one is close enough to touch you? What does it mean to be invulnerable if it also means being incapable of love? What does it mean to be completely independent if it comes at the price of connection, of intimacy, of the shared experience that gives life depth and color? And yet, for all these dangers, the path of isolation is seductive. It is easier in many ways to retreat from the world than to engage with it. Relationships require effort, vulnerability, risk. They expose a man to the possibility of pain, of failure, of rejection. Isolation, on the other hand, is safe. It is predictable. It demands nothing and offers the illusion of control. But it is an illusion, because in reality, isolation is not the absence of chaos. It is the absence of growth. It is the slow decay of what makes a man human, the quiet numbing of emotions that were meant to be felt, the gradual loss of experiences that make life worth living. So the question is not just what a man gains from prolonged solitude, but what he loses. He may gain independence, discipline, self-sufficiency. He may build a fortress of solitude so strong that nothing can shake it. But if he is not careful, he may also find that he has built a prison, and that the longer he remains inside, the harder it becomes to escape. The longer a man remains without a relationship, the more his mindset, habits, and worldview evolve, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. But whether he thrives or deteriorates is not always something he consciously chooses. Time has a way of shaping him regardless. He does not stay the same man he was when he first entered his solitude. He changes, subtly at first, then profoundly. His thoughts, his behaviors, his very perception of the world all shift under the weight of isolation. At first, he tells himself it's temporary. He enjoys the freedom, the absence of obligations, the ability to operate on his own terms. He may even feel a sense of relief, as if a burden has been lifted. Without the expectations of a relationship, he has more time, more energy, more mental space to dedicate to himself. He begins to structure his days around his own ambitions, setting goals, developing skills, and refining his sense of self. He values efficiency, clarity, and autonomy. His habits become more disciplined, his routines more structured. He learns to rely on himself, to be his own source of motivation. But as time passes, the way he interacts with the world starts to shift. He begins to notice how much of his life is self-contained. There is no one to challenge his decisions, no one to offer a different perspective, no one to remind him that compromise is an essential part of human connection. He becomes more rigid in his thinking, more resistant to change. His routines, once a source of discipline, become an impenetrable framework, and he grows irritated at anything that disrupts them. He may tell himself that he enjoys his solitude, and in many ways he does, but beneath that, he is also becoming set in his ways, less adaptable, less open to the natural unpredictability that relationships bring. His social skills, once sharp from constant interaction, begin to dull. He forgets what it's like to navigate emotional complexity, to share his life with someone, to manage the push and pull of intimacy. When he does engage with others, he finds that his patience has worn thin. Small talk feels tedious. Emotional vulnerability feels foreign. The idea of adjusting his life to accommodate someone else feels like an intrusion rather than an opportunity. And so he withdraws further, not necessarily because he wants to, but because he has become accustomed to a life without friction, without negotiation, without the messiness of human relationships. His habits change too. In the absence of a relationship, there is no external force regulating his behavior. There is no one to remind him to eat properly, to sleep at a reasonable hour, to take care of himself beyond the bare minimum required to function. If he is disciplined, he may maintain these habits out of personal principle. But if he lacks that discipline, he may slip into cycles of self-neglect. His diet deteriorates, his sleep schedule becomes erratic, his living space, once kept in order for the sake of appearances, starts to reflect his internal state, cluttered, neglected, stagnant. And then there's his perception of women, of relationships, of love itself. At first, he may hold on to a romanticized ideal, believing that when the right person comes along, he will simply know. But as time passes, that idealism can fade, replaced by skepticism, even cynicism. He starts to see relationships as more trouble than they're worth. He notices the flaws, the conflicts, the emotional labor involved, and he begins to question whether the rewards truly outweigh the cost. He convinces himself that he is better off alone. Not out of self-sufficiency, but out of a growing unwillingness to put in the effort. This shift in mindset is dangerous because it reinforces itself. The longer he remains single, the more he rationalizes his solitude. He tells himself that modern relationships are dysfunctional, that women are too demanding, that commitment is a trap. He constructs narratives that justify his isolation, and the more he believes them, the harder it becomes to see any alternative. His worldview becomes one of detachment. He is not against relationships necessarily. He just no longer sees them as necessary. And yet, despite all of this, there is still a part of him that longs for connection. He may not acknowledge it outright. He may suppress it, mock it, tell himself he has transcended such desires. But the truth is, no matter how strong a man becomes in his solitude, there is something irreplaceable about genuine human connection. Something no amount of personal achievement or self-discipline can replicate. This internal conflict between self-sufficiency and the undeniable need for connection shapes his worldview in ways he may not fully understand. If he leans too far into isolation, he may begin to resent those who have what he lacks. If he convinces himself that relationships are unnecessary, he may find himself in a state of quiet loneliness, unwilling to admit that he desires what he has chosen to forsake. And if he stays isolated for too long, he may reach a point where he is no longer capable of integrating back into the world of relationships at all. This is the slow, subtle transformation that occurs in prolonged solitude. It is not immediate, nor is it always obvious. But over time, a man who has been without a relationship for too long will inevitably find that he is not the same person he once was. His mindset shifts. His habits change. His perception of love, of connection, of himself evolves. And if he does not remain conscious of this transformation, he may wake up one day to find that he has become a stranger to the very things that once mattered most. So, the question remains, what does prolonged solitude do to a man? Does it forge him into something stronger, more capable, more independent? Or does it erode his ability to connect, to empathize, to find meaning in relationships? The answer is not simple, because solitude is not inherently good or bad. It is a force, a tool, a test, and how a man emerges from it depends entirely on whether he wields it with wisdom or allows it to consume him. For some, solitude is a necessary crucible. It strips away distraction and forces a man to confront himself in the rawest form. It is a time for refinement, for building discipline, for discovering who he truly is when no one else is watching. The man who uses his solitude wisely emerges from it sharpened, aware, and ready to re-enter the world with a sense of purpose. He is not desperate for companionship because he has proven to himself that he can stand alone. He does not chase validation, nor does he settle for mediocrity in relationships. He has cultivated strength, self-mastery, and clarity of vision. When he does choose to share his life with someone, it is a conscious decision, not one born of fear or loneliness, but of genuine desire and readiness. But there is another path, one that many men unwittingly fall into. Solitude, when misused, can become a slow descent into isolation. At first, it feels empowering. He enjoys the quiet, the freedom, the lack of emotional complexity. But as time passes, he begins to change in ways he doesn't even notice. His patience for others diminishes, his social skills atrophy. He convinces himself that he no longer needs connection, that he is above relationships, that love is a distraction, a game for weaker men. And as his world shrinks, so does his capacity for joy, for companionship, for the very things that make life rich and meaningful. This is the silent danger of prolonged solitude, the transformation that happens so slowly, so imperceptibly, that by the time he realizes what has happened, he has built a fortress around himself so impenetrable that he no longer knows how to leave. He has convinced himself that he does not need anyone, and yet, deep down, he feels a quiet ache, a lingering emptiness that no amount of discipline or self-sufficiency can completely erase. Because no matter how strong a man is, no matter how independent, he was not designed to exist in isolation. So where is the balance? How does a man navigate the fine line between solitude as a tool for self-improvement and solitude as a trap that slowly strips him of his humanity? The answer is responsibility. A man must take ownership of his solitude, must wield it with intention. He must recognize when he is using it to build himself and when he is using it to hide from the world. He must remain vigilant against the creeping inertia of isolation, ensuring that his independence does not harden into emotional detachment. And that is where the real challenge lies. It is easy to fall into extremes, to either depend too heavily on relationships for validation or to reject them entirely in favor of self-sufficiency. But true strength lies in mastering both, in knowing how to stand alone without bitterness, but also knowing when to let others in becoming disciplined and self-reliant while still remaining open to love, to connection, to the undeniable truth that life is not meant to be lived entirely in solitude. So now I ask you, where do you stand? Have you used your solitude to build yourself into something greater, or have you let it isolate you from the world? Have you found the balance between independence and connection, or have you drifted too far into one extreme? Let me know in the comments, because this is a conversation that needs to be had, a question that every man must answer for himself.